In the early 1400s, the Ming Dynasty decided to show the world what it was made of. And what it was made of, apparently, was wood. Lots and lots of wood. They built a fleet of treasure ships so mind-bogglingly huge that Christopher Columbus's Santa Maria looked like a bathtub toy in comparison. We're talking 400-foot-long behemoths with 9 masts, watertight compartments, and crews of up to 28,000 sailors, soldiers, and diplomats. Their admiral, Zheng He, wasn't a conqueror. He was more like the world's most over-prepared delivery driver. He sailed to Africa and brought back a giraffe for the emperor's zoo. A giraffe. Because when you're the undisputed global superpower, your foreign policy involves collecting exotic animals just to prove you can. This was the peak, the absolute summit of maritime achievement. So, you've established global naval dominance and a trade network that makes you fabulously wealthy. The next logical step is obviously to scrap the entire project. The young Lei emperor who sponsored these grand voyages dies in 1424. His successors were far less enthusiastic. They started listening to their Confucian scholar bureaucrats, a group of very smart, very well-read men who believed that China was the literal center of the universe. To them, all foreigners were uncultured barbarians, and trade was a grubby, dishonorable business for merchants who were basically at the bottom of the social ladder. The argument was simple. China is perfect. It has everything it needs. Why would we possibly want to deal with the messy, inferior outside world? It's the geopolitical equivalent of a teenager deciding they're too cool for everyone and locking themselves in their room. This wasn't a gradual phasing out. It was a bonfire. A very literal, very stupid bonfire. By 1477, a court official named Liu Daxia found the records of Zheng He's voyages and, according to some sources, promptly burned them. His reasoning? They were full of deceitful exaggerations of strange things. He essentially fact-checked the existence of giraffes and decided it was fake news. The imperial court then issued a series of edicts known as the hygiene, or sea bans. The treasure ships, the most advanced naval vessels on Earth, were left to rot or were deliberately destroyed. They effectively erased their own greatest technological achievement. It's like NASA landing on the moon and then deciding to shred all the blueprints for the Saturn V rocket because space is a bit weird. The sea bans got progressively more ridiculous. At first, it was about stopping grand state-sponsored expeditions. Then, it spiraled. Soon, it was illegal for a private citizen to build a ship with more than 2 masts. Then, it became illegal for anyone to even go to sea for private trade. The punishment for violating this was, naturally, death. This policy managed to cripple China's entire southern coastal economy, which had thrived on maritime trade for centuries. It impoverished millions of fishermen, merchants, and shipbuilders. The government's master plan was to stop foreign influence by making their own most dynamic citizens unemployed and desperate. A truly brilliant move with absolutely no foreseeable negative consequences. So, what happens when you make a profitable activity illegal? If you guessed it stops completely, congratulations! You're qualified to be a Ming-era bureaucrat. For everyone else, the answer is smuggling. A massive black market exploded along the coast. And this led to the problem of the woko, the so-called Japanese pirates that terrorized the Chinese coast for decades. Here's the punchline. Modern research shows that the vast majority of these Japanese pirates were Chinese. They were the very merchants and sailors the government had put out of business. The Ming Dynasty created its own pirate menace. They looked at a thriving economy, banned it into a criminal enterprise, and then were shocked when criminals started showing up. It's like setting your house on fire and then complaining about the smoke. The thing about ignoring the world is that the world doesn't ignore you back. In 1517, the Portuguese showed up. They arrived in their rickety little caravels, armed with cannons that were, frankly, better than most of what the Ming had. The Chinese military had stagnated. While they were busy worrying about domestic purity, Europe was having a renaissance and an arms race. The Ming court treated the Portuguese with utter disdain, calling them ocean devils and assuming they were just another batch of tribute-paying barbarians. They completely failed to grasp that these weren't people coming to admire China's perfection, they were coming to do business, violently if necessary. The outside world had changed, and China had deliberately missed all the memos. Here's the grand irony. Despite all the bans, China couldn't escape the world economy. They just made their position in it much, much worse. China's economy effectively shifted to a silver standard, partly thanks to a tax policy called the single whip reform, which required payments in silver. And where did all this silver come from? The Americas, mined by the Spanish and funneled through the Philippines. So China, the empire that wanted to be a self-sufficient island, made its entire monetary system dependent on a foreign metal, supplied by foreigners through illegal trade channels they were actively trying to shut down. This created massive economic volatility. When the silver supply from the New World dried up in the 1630s, the Ming economy simply collapsed. It was a completely avoidable, self-inflicted economic catastrophe. The fall of the Ming Dynasty in 1644 was a death by 1,000 cuts, and most of the knives were self-sharpened. The economic chaos caused by the silver crisis fueled massive peasant rebellions. Their military, once a global powerhouse, had become technologically backward and couldn't innovate to face new threats. They poured immense resources into rebuilding the Great Wall, the ultimate symbol of isolationism. It was a monument to their worldview: lock the door and hope the world goes away. But the real threats weren't just outside. Famine, driven partly by the Little Ice Age, but exacerbated by a rigid and broken economy, ravaged the country. The dynasty was hollowed out from the inside. The isolation hadn't protected them. It had made them fragile, brittle, and unable to adapt. And the grand finale? The final poetic act of stupidity? The mighty Ming weren't conquered by a massive army smashing through their impenetrable Great Wall. No, the Manchu invaders who would found the next dynasty, the Qing, mostly just walked in. A Ming general named Wu Sangui, caught between a rebel army and the Manchus, decided to open the gates at Shanhai Pass. After centuries of navel-gazing and building walls, the dynasty fell because of an internal dispute and one guy with a key. The entire isolationist project, designed to preserve Chinese purity and protect from outside threats, failed completely. It not only invited the eventual takeover, it guaranteed it by making the Ming Empire too rigid and weak to survive in a world that refused to stop turning just for them. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!